Hello, good people of YouTube. Mountbatten here. And today we're going to talk about blowout matches and what I think is causing them. So let's go ahead and dive right on in. So, the symptoms of a blowout match. If you somehow have never experienced a blowout match, this is what a blowout match is, or at least some symptoms of a blowout match. They are extremely short matches, meaning, in my book, a short match in World of Warships is 9 minutes and below. These matches are shorter than that. They are like 7 minutes and below. Most of these matches I'm noticing they're lasting about, 6.5 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes. And keep in mind too, in World of Warships, even if there's a CV in the game, you can see the enemy team, it's still going to take about 2 to 3 minutes to get in position. And then after that's when you're really going to be fighting. So in a blowout match, you have maybe 4 to 5 minutes of actual combat, if that. And these are normally very lopsided matches, which means the winning team may win without losing a single ship. And God, that's pretty bad in a 12v12 game where there's no respawning, that the enemy team wins without losing a single person. So there's an obvious skill gap in these teams as well. And teams are extremely passive in blowout matches. They don't want to push. They don't want to sit there and hold a flank against superior numbers. They'll run at the first sign of trouble. This is something I've been noticing increasing so much recently, is teams just refusing to sit there and try to hold a flank when you don't outnumber the enemy ships 3-1. But simultaneously, your team on the other flank, where you do have the numbers advantage, won't want to push for whatever reason. So the teams are extremely passive. They don't want to stand and fight, but they don't want to push and fight either. And these matches are now zeroing out a lot more. Back in the day, guys, zeroing out means, by the way, that your number of points that your team has gets to 0 and the match ends. Back in the day, that rarely ever happened. When I first started playing 2 to 3 years ago, I can barely remember having a 0-out game. I mean, I do remember it happened, but it didn't happen near as much as it does now. Those of you watching the live stream last night, I mean, there were several times where I was just absolutely astounded that we got zeroed out in the time that we did. In order to zero out a team, by the way, if you don't know, you either have to deny the enemy team caps and sink enough ships to decrease their starting points to 0, or sink them faster than their caps can regenerate their points. So, in other words, you have to absolutely wipe the floor with a team in order to zero them out. And I've been seeing a whole lot more of these matches recently than before. Alright, so that's the general gist of what a blowout match is. So what do I think is causing it? Well, I've got 4 things that I think are causing these matches to occur more and more frequently. So let's go ahead and get on into those. The first one is an increase of higher tier premium ships being sold. By that, I mean, back in the day, Wargaming stopped selling premiums outright for cash at tier 8. Tier 9 and tier 10 were off limits to premium ships being sold for straight up cash. They did have reward ships that you could get by competing in clan battles and consecutive wins in clan battles. You could get reward ships like the Salem and the Black, so they were pretty hard to obtain before they went to the armory system that we have today. But then they started to offer tier 9 premiums for free XP, like the Missouri. Missouri was the first tier 9 ship that was available for free XP, well, the first ship available for free XP outright. So she cost 750,000 free XP. Now, there's still a safeguard in selling a ship for free XP, being that the player has to earn that much free XP. And they have 2 ways to do that. The first way is that they legitimately just grind out that much free XP, which would take quite some time. Or they would have to earn enough ship XP in order to convert it to free XP. And that involves having, well, a tier 10 ship that you can grind ship XP on. And then, of course, once you have that tier 10 ship, you would have to earn that much free XP, that much ship XP in order to convert it. So let's say you have a curve first. Once you grind out the curve first, meaning that you have to have at least one tier 10, you would then have to grind 750,000 ship XP on the curve first, which even with all the boosters and signal flags and special camouflages of today, would still take quite some time. So that means you would spend a lot of time in the game, at least, getting to know how the game works and such. So you were still fairly experienced when getting these free XP ships. But nowadays, Tier 9 premiums are sold outright. Just thinking off the top of my head, Aguirre, Palmer, Jean Bar, Missouri. Well, Missouri's not available anymore, but she has a Tier 9 premium ship. Azuma. All these ships are available for around $80 in the premium shop. Well, again, Jean Bar was removed, but you guys get what I'm saying. There's plenty of Tier 9 premium ships that are sold just for outright cash. Georgia, too. So Tier 9 seems to be where they've moved their stoppage of... I'm sorry, no, Tier 10 is where they moved their line now, saying we will not sell Tier 10 premium ships outright. But that rule has been broken once. Puerto Rico was sold outright. Granted, it was like $300 if you wanted to buy Puerto Rico outright, but they did do it. However, at the moment, as of me recording this, there are no Tier 10 ships that you can outright buy. But again, there are ships like the Hayate for 2 million free XP, the Slava for 63,000 Research Bureau points, which again, you still have to regrind line and stuff to get the Slava, and you still have to get 2 million free XP, or at least 2 million ship XP if you want to get the Hayate. But with a bunch of Tier 9 ships being available to buy, someone who's bored of grinding at Tier 5 can just whip out their credit card, and if they're willing to spend $80, they can get a Tier 9 premium right away, and that obviously means that they don't have the experience needed to really play at higher tiers if all they have is a Tier 5, and that used to kind of be the meme around Tier 8 ships. You know, the Turpits got its name, the Derpits, for a reason. You would have players that got tired of grinding low tiers, who would just buy Turpits and go around and, well, get sunk a lot because they didn't know what they were doing. I was one of them. Turpits was my first Tier 8 premium ship ever, and I got it because I was tired of grinding the New York. I bought the Turpits, played, I think, about 3 or 4 rounds in it, quickly understood that I had no idea what was going on at higher tier, docked the Turpits, and came back to the New York. So, yeah, I was one of those people, but now you're seeing this happen at Tier 9 instead of Tier 8. But, I mean, obviously it's still happening at Tier 8, but it's happening at Tier 9 now, too, which is obviously terrible for higher tier games, because having players running around, not knowing what they're doing, isn't great for the game. So, that's one main cause right there. Second main cause, the decrease of the time to grind. So, in the game right now, the average Joe could more than likely grind to Tier 10 in about 40 to 50 games. On the surface, there's nothing wrong with that. However, back in the day, it used to take a little while longer. When I first started playing the game as a new player, it took me about a month to grind from Tier 1 in the American Battleship line to Tier 10. And that was without premium, without any special signal flags. It took me about a month of playing the game fairly often. And nowadays, obviously a player with the resources that I have, a premium account, camouflage, tons of signal flags, I could probably do it in about 20 games. If I really stuck to it, tried my best to just farm out damage in every single game, I could probably do it in 20 games. Average Joe, probably 40 with a premium account and special camos and signals that are sold for doubloons or for coal in the armory. It really doesn't take that long to get to a Tier 10 ship. Now, it takes most people around 500 games to understand the basic game mechanics. Starting World of Warships for the first time is a big learning curve. There's lots of new mechanics that aren't obviously in major AAA games in this game. Takes people time to know the characteristics of other ships. You know, trying to remember all the radar ranges of the radar cruisers, what ship has torpedoes, what ship doesn't, what's their torpedo range, how fast do their torpedoes go, what's the characteristics of this ship's gun arc, does this ship have improved pin angles, does this ship have good HE, things like that. It takes people time in order to process all that information, and that's just knowing the characteristics of other ships, knowing the characteristics of your ship, and how to play it takes even more time than that. So, you know, having a Tier 10 ship is obviously a good thing, but people normally start to really understand and become decent at the game when they have 2 or 3 tier 10 ships, then that normally means that they have a solid understanding of the game. So the decrease in time to grind, while is of course good for a new player, it's not necessarily good for the game because you're depriving the player of those matches needed to understand the game. Now, am I saying should it take 500 matches to get a tier 10? No, obviously not. But 40 games, that's not a lot of games to get to tier 10. Now look at War Thunder on the other hand, which is the opposite of World of Warships. It takes forever to get to a high tier vehicle in War Thunder, which is honestly pretty suckish. I mean, I was grinding for the mouse, they removed the mouse, and now I want the F4, and good God, that's another story for another time, but it takes forever to get to a high tier vehicle in War Thunder. But World of Warships, 40 games to get to a high tier ship, to get to a tier 10 ship. Which leads me to my third issue. CVs, stop typing, hear me out. CVs are fine for the most part. However, AA is still wildly inconsistent, being that it's either completely worthless or impenetrable. AA is just not what it used to be and still needs a whole lot of work, in my opinion. You can have ships that before the CV rework were just no-fly zones, like the Montana, which by themselves back in the day would prevent any thought of a CV striking that ship from crossing the CV player's mind, to now where if a Montana goes off by themselves, well, the CV is going to pick on them, obviously, because when ships are grouped up in large groups of like 5 or more, they're pretty impenetrable to the average CV player, which leads the average CV player having to choose one ship that has gone off by themselves, or not even by themselves, that's with just 2 or 3 ships. And they have to strike that one ship because they don't have any other choice. Because it's either lose all your planes to this huge old death ball group over here, or go after the smaller group of maybe 2 to 3 ships, which back in the day would have been perfectly safe from a CV, or at least being able to inflict enough damage to where it costs the CV something to strike them. So now you're in the situation where you're punishing players for leaving the main group, even in groups of 2 or 3, and the AA is still useless to where that CV can still get through those 3 ships AA unless it's like a Worcester, a Des Moines, and a Montana. They could still probably get through it, but they would at least pay at that point. But if you're not taking those ships, and if it's, let's say, a Hindenburg, a Venezia, and a Montana, they can still get through that. And really skilled CV players can get through that with no losses. Now, when you do have enough ships grouped up together, they are safe, which leads to the death ball meta, to where nobody wants to go anywhere, even in groups of 2 or 3 ships, because they know the CV will pick me off and I will die and there's nothing I can do about it. So, it's not the CV player's fault. It's the AA mechanic that still needs to be worked on right now. And then you also have the instant, almost permanent spotting. Now, there is a proposed change to this, which would, of course, help out the DD players and most surface ships with being spotted by CVs, but it comes at a huge downside of, well, AA traps will no longer be a thing, and thereby nerfing the last destroyers that could really stand up to CVs, but I already made a video about that. And on top of that, CVs like Richtofen and Hawk, a couple of the CVs that I still think need individual changes, deal citadel damage to ships. Massive citadel damage to ships. Richtofen can deal 26,400 damage in one strike. Citadel damage. Damage that cannot be repaired. Well, a small percentage of it can, but it can absolutely nuke cruisers, nuke battleships. That's over a quarter of Kurfürst's health. in one strike. It's relatively easy to do if you're a skilled CV player, and it's almost unavoidable. You have to absolutely break the rudder trying to turn in order to avoid these bombs. And still, even if 2 of them hit, you're losing like 15,000 health still. So it's, oh god, it's terrible. Now, if it was normal pin damage, yeah, that would make it hurt a little bit less, and that's something that I think they need to look into, rather than dealing straight up Citadel damage to something that's, I focused my A, I've launched my spotter plane. Oh, well, he's not helping me out in this case, and then boom, I'm down 26,000 health. Ugh. And of course, most CVs can absolutely nuke DDs out of existence, which of course lead to them not splitting from their groups. Which means we're back in a giant death ball with nobody pushing, everybody staying grouped up, and yeah. Alright, the fourth thing. HE spam. So, HE involves less skill to use. It's just the nature of HE. You don't really need to worry about where you're hitting the ship. As long as you're hitting them somewhere on the deck, you have a chance of starting a fire, and you'll probably do some type of pin damage to them anyway. It is HE pin, so of course it's not like being pinned with AP, but most of the HE spam ships that we know and love have incredibly fast firing guns or incredible amounts of HE alpha damage. Ships like Yoshino, Thunderer, Smolensk, Colbert, just to name a few. They are incredibly annoying to deal with and are not fun to fight at all. Yoshino and Thunderer can sit back at their max range, just chunking you for tens of thousands of points of damage. Thunderer especially. It's always fun to lose 15k in HE Alpha and then get set on fire in 3 places in one salvo. Yoshino, that thing can blow up if shot properly in one salvo. Thunderer's a bit harder to deal with. And then ships like Smolensk and Colbert that can absolutely bathe your ship in HE shells in a matter of seconds. 16 guns on these cruisers that can reload in under 3 seconds if built for it, which many of them do build for it. And they're incredibly annoying to deal with. Smolensk has a smoke screen, pump smoke, sit in the open, rain HE down on your team, and if you shoot at them, even in heavy cruisers, you will more than likely overpin them unless you, of course, hit their citadel and heavy cruisers, which is incredibly hard to do when you can't see the thing. And in a battleship, even if you see it and blast the thing, unless he's actually angled to you, ironically, your shells are going to pass right through him with doing minimal damage. And Colbella, at least, if he slips up, you can nuke him, but he's still incredibly difficult to deal with. And Colbella's pretty rare, because why get the Colbert that you will be punished for if you slip up in, when you can get the Smolensk that if you slip up in it, you just lose a couple of thousand health and overpins, and you can go about your merry way, melting anything that gets in within your main battery gun range, which can also be pushed out to 19 kilometers somehow in Smolensk, when ships that compete at tier 10 like Massachusetts are limited to an 18-kilometer main battery range. Massachusetts is a battleship with 16-inch guns. Smolensk has anti-aircraft guns. Yeah. So, more and more of these HE spammy ships keep getting introduced. So, one of these ships is completely capable of shutting down a flank in the current meta, because no one wants to go out there, lose half of their health to a Smolensk just to either capture a cap or get a push going, because they know that, well, after I burn my damage con and after I burn my heal, the Smolensk can easily burn me down before either of those come off cooldown. And any of these ships are capable of that, Yoshino, Thunderer, or Colbert. And these ships are, of course, impossible to angle against, because HE doesn't care what your angle is. It's either going to get pins on you, start fires. It doesn't matter how you angle. And even with anti-fire builds, you will still burn down fast. Yes, it's nice that your Kremlin can only get set on fire in 3 places, but when every salvo from a Thunderer starts 2 or more fires, it doesn't really matter. You're still going to burn down very, 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 very fast. So it's completely understandable that ships are very hesitant to push in this. So before we get to my final point, so far we have an increase in the number of high tier ships that's available to purchase. Just outright cash, don't have to play a single game in lower tier in order to buy these ships. Then you have a decrease in the amount of time that it takes to grind to tier 10. And then you have the CVs and the unreliable AA, to where the CVs are basically forced to go after these ships that break off from the main group. And then you have HE spam, which again means people do not want to push. They do not want to be that ship that gets spotted and gets melted by the Thunderer. And then you throw the Corona lockdown on top of that. And that is the accelerant to this brewing mess at tier 10. Before the lockdown, blowout matches were happening, and sure, they were on the rise, but after the lockdown and an influx of new players, and it's just a mess now. And I'm not crapping on new players. New players are great for the game. It's new enthusiasm for the game, new support for the game, new players spending money. That's, at the end of the day, money being spent on the game is of course good. Pays to keep the servers up, pays for new development for the game. We're not talking about, the business practices of wargaming here. We're just talking about the health of the game. What wargaming chooses to do with the money, that's a different story. They do some good things, they do some bad things, but that's a different video for a different day. Just at the end of the day, new players coming in, spending money is good for the health and the life of the game. But the ability for them to buy into high tier gameplay, just like that, just with a swipe of a credit card, go straight up to tier 9, or grind their way to tier 10 if they spend the money for it. That is bad for the game, and we saw that just get absolutely accelerated during the lockdown. Just look on the North American server, look at the numbers, they went through the roof. Sure, it's a lot of players that normally play the game, that they can just play the game all the time now because they're being forced to stay home, but the North American server also gained a whole lot of new players during this time period. And now, if you're just unfortunate enough to be on the team with most of these newer players, you just, look at some of these matches from the matchmaking monitor. I've blurred out all the names, so no one can know who these players are, but look at some of these matchups and the difference between average damage and average battles and average win rate. It's incredible that these are players that by this point we're supposed to have hundreds of battles played, have a pretty solid idea of what they're doing, yet they have some of these stats. I'm not normally one to bring up stats, but when you have teams that look like this at tier 10, that's an issue. And to be clear, I'm not crapping on these players. I was one of those guys. I got bored of grinding at tier 5. I bought a Turpit. I played like 4 or 5 battles in it at tier 8. I had no idea what I was doing, and I went back down to tier 5 and finished grinding out the American battleship line before I even touched the Turpits again. I'm saying it's a problem that there's a system in place that allows players to get to high tier like that without putting them through the proper amount of battles in order for them to, of course, learn the game properly. Now, wargaming is a business. They're in to make money. High tier premiums sell incredibly well, and they are very, very, very attractive to newer players. I understand that, but there has to be a cutback in the amount of higher tier premiums being sold. I think that's a major issue of the game. With forcing a player to at least play, 40 battles with the speedy grind that is the grind to tier 10 now, they're at least getting those 40 battles in. There's at least some type of experience needed for them to grind up to that higher tier ship. But when you can just buy a premium, there's no experience involved. But I do also like premium ships. Obviously Odin, Tirpitz, Massachusetts, they're some of my favorite ships in the game. And the idea behind them is sound in nature. You sell some ships to make some money to keep the game going. But when you have ships that are being sold at tier 9, and I wouldn't be surprised within another year or so they just outright sell tier 10 premium ships, that's an issue. And, free XP ships that you have to grind to and coal ships that you have to save up for, again, those are some safeguard measures to where you can ensure that those ships get in the right player's hands. But when you just start selling ships for just straight up cash, that's when we start seeing issues like this. Now, if you do remove the high tier premiums, being able to just outright buy them, that will solve a big chunk of the issues. But the other issues, the unreliable AA forcing the CV to have to just bully the ships that go off by themselves, the HE spam, those are other issues that of course need to be resolved as well. So of course I don't have an answer as to how you fix the current state of high tier gameplay, but a good step in the right direction would be to cut back on the amount of high tier premiums just being outright sold for cash. That would be a good first step in the right direction. But will Wargaming do that? Probably not. I mean, they're a business. Or of course in it at the end of the day to make money, and high tier premiums sell like hotcakes. Anyway, guys, if you enjoyed the video, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe. Tell me what you guys think. Do you think I'm accurate with my theory here? Do you guys agree? Do you disagree? What do you think's the issue with higher tier gameplay? Let me know in the comments down below. Hope you guys are having a wonderful day, and those of you that are in Laura's path now, I hope you remain safe. I know she's up in Arkansas by this point. I think actually I think she's getting close to like maybe Virginia by this point. She was moving pretty quick there for some time. But anyway, guys, hope all of you are safe. Hope you have a wonderful day, and hope to see you guys in the next one.